Hi, and welcome to the second part in our series introducing multi-channel funnels. If you've not watched the first part of this series and you're unfamiliar with multi-channel funnels, then I'd encourage you to go to the Facts and Figures blog at appliedwebanalytics.com and watch the first part of this tutorial before you go any further. So today we're looking at the wider impact of the changes to your Google Analytics data. And at the end of this tutorial you should be equipped to avoid being easily misled by these changes and understand how to account for them. You may not realise that the data that's been guiding your strategies has been subtly altered. We'll explain this here. And in the third part in December, we'll be getting to the material that should really grab your attention: how to improve your profits with multi-channel funnels. So, let's begin. On the 18th of August 2011, something happened. Google Analytics changed the way it counts a visit. I don't know if you've ever wondered how Google Analytics counts an individual visit. Let me give you an example. Suppose a visitor, let's call him Bob, arrives at your site. The JavaScript tracking code in that page alerts Google Analytics that a browser has arrived at the page. Google Analytics then checks for cookies in that browser. This way, if Bob has visited your site before and hasn't disabled first-party cookies or deleted them, and the cookie hasn't expired, and by default a Google Analytics cookie is set to last for up to 2 years, then that cookie tells you that Bob is a repeat visitor. That is someone who has previously started and finished a visit to your site. Now the big question is, how do you know when someone has finished a visit? Let me give you an example. Suppose Bob has a look at your brand new lawnmower e-commerce site and he considers buying one. Then he opens another tab in his browser to access his email and send a quick message to another lawnmower enthusiast. And 15 minutes later he returns to your site, which is still open, and buys a shiny new lawnmower. Has he made 2 visits to your site or just one long one? What do you think? Well, there's not really a right or wrong answer, and there's a whole bunch of scenarios that are similarly debatable. And there's no need to consider it too much because ultimately it all comes down to Google Analytics definition and how Google's tracking counts visits. So before August the 18th, Google classed a visit as ending using the following criteria. After 30 minutes of inactivity, so if Bob's browser requests no more data, opens no new pages for 30 minutes, then bang, that session has ended. Secondly, and this one's often overlooked, at the end of a day. So when the clock strikes midnight, visits end and new visits begin. This may explain, if you're an international e-commerce site, why you'd expect to see a peak in visitors around midnight, because existing visits are chopped into 2 and classed as 2 visits. And thirdly, when a visitor closes their browser. Now, following the introduction of multi-channel funnels, a visit is considered to have ended, again after 30 minutes of inactivity, and again at the end of the day. But the change is the third point, when the source campaign changes in any way. If you recall from our first tutorial, Multi-channel funnels now records each different campaign which ultimately led to a sale within 30 days. The knock-on effect of this is that if those different campaigns interacted with a visitor during what would previously have been classed as one visit, each campaign interaction now marks the start of a completely new visit. For example, suppose a visitor follows an online ad to your site, then opens another tab, enters another search into Google, and follows a different ad again to your site. Then they open up their email and follow an email link again to your site. Previously, these were all counted as part of the same visits, as long as they were reasonably close, as long as 30 minutes of inactivity did not occur, and as long as the day didn't end. But now, each time they interacted with a new campaign, a new visit began. So these are now 3 visits. This what was 1 visit is now classed as 3 visits. So data before August the 18th is unaffected, but after that date we'd expect to see some changes. For instance, you might see a slight increase in visits or bounce rates in some areas. If we look at the Google Analytics overview page, we see that visits, average time on site, bounce rate, new visits, these are all affected. In fact, only unique visitors and page views in that list remain constant. So this is my point 1. If you see changes around this date, you can use unique visitors and page views as a kind of a sense check. Their recording methods have remained consistent. So do you see the changes that you think you may be seeing in those figures as well? Secondly, we can set up a custom report to count how many unique visitors would have been counted differently in your earlier data. Each of those instances where a visitor returns through a different source would previously have been classed as a 0 visit. Now this is slightly odd, hard to get your head around. This is a unique visitor who arrived at your site without recording a visit, as they're still included in an ongoing visit. It sounds odd, but that's what happened. The difference is now each of those arrivals is counted as a visit. And we can actually count how often a 0 visit occurred in our old data. If you set up the following custom report, and I'll just let you have a look at that. Now, I owe thanks to an analyst called Michael Whitaker for this technique, so thanks Michael. So use this custom report and then set the filter to visits equals 0. We can now see exactly how many unique visitors experienced 0 visits. And for this period it was 547. If you're looking at changes in specific areas, then you can apply advanced segments to drill down and see in more detail how many visits were affected in specific areas. So that's point 2. You can use custom reports to count 0 visits in your old data. But that can only tell you so much. So if you're making some big commercial decisions informed by changes around the 18th of August, and you can't drill down to exactly what you need, you may need to retest. So this is point 3. For big commercial decisions, you may need to retest. So I hope you now have a better understanding of the changes across your analytics data and how Google Analytics counts a visit. And I hope to see you for part 3 in December, where we will be looking at using multi-channel funnels to improve your profits. But for now, that's the end of our tutorial, so thanks and goodbye.